The stagecoach hit another deep rut in the road, and the wooden frame shook hard enough to rattle bones. Inside that cramped space, 6 passengers sat pressed together like cattle in a pen. The August heat of 1883 pushed through every crack in the walls. Dust floated in the air, thick enough to taste. Sweat dripped down faces and soaked through cotton shirts. But it was not the heat that made grown men clench their fists. It was not the dust that made women press handkerchiefs to their mouths. It was the baby. The baby screamed like the world itself had betrayed him. His cries were high and sharp, climbing into the skull and refusing to leave. The sound bounced off the wooden walls and filled every inch of that miserable coach. One passenger, a traveling salesman with a red face and thinning hair, looked ready to throw himself from the moving vehicle just to escape that terrible noise. The child belonged to the wealthiest man on the coach. Owen Sutton sat in the best seat, facing forward, with his 2-month-old son pressed against his chest. He was 34 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with hands scarred from years of building his ranch from nothing. His coat was fine wool despite the summer heat. His boots were polished even under the trail dust. Everything about him spoke of money and control, everything except the furious infant in his arms. The baby was red-faced and shaking with rage. His tiny fist punched at the air. His mouth opened wide as if trying to swallow the whole world and spit it back out in protest. Owen bounced him gently, then firmly, then desperately. Nothing worked. Across from him sat a woman in a plain gray dress. Her name was Vera Buckley, though no one on that coach knew it yet. She was 28 years old, but grief had carved lines around her eyes that made her look older. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple knot. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her face was still and quiet, like someone who had learned long ago to take up very little space in the world. She looked out the window at the endless grassland rolling past, mile after mile of nothing but brown grass and blue sky. She was traveling from Cheyenne to Fort Collins because her cousin had written about work at a boarding house. Moving forward, even when it hurt, was better than standing still. But when the baby's cry sharpened into something desperate and wild, Vera's fingers tightened together until her knuckles turned white. She tried not to listen. She tried not to feel what her body recognized immediately. 6 months ago, Vera had buried her daughter. Martha had been born too early and too small on a freezing February morning. She had lived for 3 days. 3 precious days of soft breaths and tiny fingers wrapped around Vera's thumb. Then she was gone, leaving behind a silence so heavy that Vera thought it might crush her completely. The milk had come anyway. Her body had not understood the loss. For weeks, Vera had woken in the night with her chest aching, reaching for a baby who was no longer there. It had taken months for the physical pain to lessen. It had never fully stopped. Now, sitting only feet from a screaming infant, her body responded without asking permission. Her breast grew tight and hot beneath the thin fabric of her dress. The familiar ache spread through her chest like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. This was not her child. This was not her place. She turned her face toward the window and breathed slowly, fighting the pull of instinct. The stagecoach had left Cheyenne at dawn on a Tuesday, carrying 6 passengers toward Fort Collins. The fare was $8 per person, a cruel price considering the hard wooden seats and the way the road threatened to shake teeth loose. Most folks traveled by train when they could afford it, but the nearest station there was 40 miles out of the way, and Owen Sutton did not have time for detours. He did not have time for anything except keeping his son alive. 8 weeks ago, Owen had watched his wife Caroline bleed to death in their bedroom. The labor had been long and hard. The midwife had done everything she could. But some battles cannot be won, and by morning, Owen was holding a healthy baby boy with one hand and his wife's cold fingers with the other. He had hired a wet nurse the very next day, a sturdy woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had raised 5 children of her own and seemed to know everything there was to know about babies. She had kept Owen's son fed and growing for 2 months while Owen learned to be a father alone. But Mrs. Patterson had not come this morning. Her own daughter had gone into labor 2 days early, and she had sent word that she would not be available for at least a week. Owen had tried to wait. He had tried bottles and goat's milk and every other remedy the ranch hand suggested. Nothing worked. His son screamed and refused everything Owen offered. That was how he ended up on this stagecoach, hoping his sister in Fort Collins could help him find another wet nurse. His son screamed like he was starving because he was starving. And Owen Sutton, who owned thousands of acres and employed more men than most towns, could not do a single thing about it. The baby's cries grew thinner now, weaker, slipping from anger into something that sounded like defeat. Owen looked down at his son with eyes that were red and raw from lack of sleep. The helplessness on his face was painful to witness. This was a man who had built his fortune through stubborn will and hard work. A man who had never backed down from a fight in his life. And here he sat, broken by a child no bigger than a loaf of bread. Vera watched him from the corner of her eye. She saw the way his hands shook as he tried to adjust the baby's position. She saw the muscle jumping in his jaw as he clenched his teeth against the sound of his own son's suffering. She looked away quickly, heart pounding, and fixed her eyes on the horizon once more. The stagecoach rolled on toward Fort Collins, carrying its cargo of miserable passengers and one desperate father who had no idea that his salvation sat 3 feet away, folding her hands against the ache in her chest. They stopped at a relay station 30 miles outside of Cheyenne. The station was nothing more than a wooden shack with a water pump and a tired-looking man who swapped out the horses with practiced hands. The passengers climbed down from the coach gratefully, stretching their legs and gulping fresh air like they had been underwater for hours. Owen Sutton paced the hard-packed dirt with his baby in his arms. He bounced the child too stiffly, whispered words that did nothing, tried the bottle one more time with the same result. The baby turned his head away from the rubber nipple like it had personally insulted him. A woman in a yellow dress watched from the shade of the building, pity plain on her face. Her husband muttered something about how a man had no business traveling alone with an infant. The salesman with the red face stood as far from Owen as possible, smoking a cigarette and shaking his head. Vera Buckley bought a cup of water from the station keeper and drank it slowly, watching Owen struggle. Every cry from that baby sent a fresh wave of pain through her chest. Every moment of silence when the child paused to catch his breath felt like mercy. She climbed back into the coach before anyone could see the tears in her eyes. An hour later, the situation had grown worse. The baby no longer screamed with rage. He cried in thin, exhausted wails, the sound of a child who had given up expecting help. His skin had taken on a grayish color that frightened Vera deeply. She had seen that look before, on calves that had been separated from their mothers too long. The salesman finally climbed out through the door and pulled himself up onto the roof to ride with the driver. He preferred the danger of falling off a moving stagecoach to the sound of that suffering child. No one blamed him. Owen's hands trembled as he held his son. Something inside him was breaking, cracking apart like ice in spring. He had never felt so helpless in his entire life. He had never felt so close to falling on his knees and begging God for mercy. Vera could not take it anymore. She stood as the coach swayed, grabbing the seat to steady herself. Owen looked up at her with eyes that had gone hollow with exhaustion and fear. "He is hungry," she said quietly. Owen's jaw tightened. "I have tried the bottle. He will not take it. Not that kind of hungry." Vera took a breath that shook in her chest, not the kind a bottle can fix. Understanding flickered across Owen's face, then shock, then a desperate, terrible hope that made him look like a drowning man reaching for a rope. Vera swallowed hard. "I am a widow. I lost my daughter 6 months ago. My body has not forgotten how to feed a child." Silence fell over the coach. The other passengers, a married couple heading to visit family, stared at Vera with wide eyes. This was not done. Women did not speak of such things openly. They certainly did not offer such intimate help to strangers. But the baby cried again, a sound so weak and pitiful that it cut through all rules of propriety like a knife through butter. "You would do that?" Owen asked. His voice cracked on the words. "You would feed him?" Vera looked at the baby. His tiny fingers were curled against his father's chest. His mouth was open, searching, desperate for something that was not there. "For him," she said simply, "I would do it for him." Owen nodded once, sharp and quick. He pulled the thin curtain across the window for privacy, blocking out the stares of the other passengers. Then, with hands that shook badly, he passed the baby to Vera. She sat down carefully. Her fingers worked at the buttons of her dress, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was mad. This was scandalous. This was the only thing that could save this child's life. The baby fought for a moment when she brought him close. He was too tired to understand what was happening. Then instinct took over. He latched on suddenly, desperately, with a strength that surprised her. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Vera gasped softly as the pressure in her chest eased. Tears streamed down her face, and she did not try to stop them. For 6 months, her body had ached for this, had woken her in the night with phantom cries and empty arms. Now there was a child pressed against her skin, feeding hungrily, and the world narrowed down to this one perfect moment. The silence in the coach was absolute. Owen leaned against the wall with his eyes closed, breathing like a man who had been pulled back from the edge of a cliff. His face was wet. He did not try to hide it. Behind the curtain, the other passengers said nothing. Some things were too raw for comment. The baby fed for a long time. Vera held him close, whispering nonsense words, stroking his soft hair with trembling fingers. When he finally relaxed, his small body growing heavy with the deep sleep of a satisfied child, she held him for a moment longer than necessary. She had forgotten how this felt. The weight of a baby in her arms, the sweet smell of milk and new skin, the way the world seemed to stop turning when you held something so precious and fragile. Eventually, she buttoned her dress and handed the sleeping child back to his father. Owen took his son with hands that had steadied. He looked at Vera with an expression she could not read. Gratitude, certainly, but something else too, something that looked like the beginning of recognition, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time. "Thank you," he said. The words were inadequate, and they both knew it. Vera nodded. She straightened her skirt and folded her hands in her lap and looked out the window at the grassland rolling past. Her cheeks were still wet with tears. Her chest still ached, though differently now. She had done an unthinkable thing. She had nursed a stranger's child in the back of a stagecoach, with witnesses present. Her reputation, already fragile as a widow traveling alone, might never recover. She found that she did not care. The baby slept peacefully in his father's arms for the rest of the journey. His color returned slowly, pink spreading across his cheeks like dawn breaking over the mountains. His breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of a child who finally felt safe. Owen watched his son sleep and made a decision that would change the course of his life. He could not let this woman disappear into Fort Collins. He could not watch her walk away and spend the rest of his days wondering what had happened to the stranger who saved his son when he could not. The stagecoach rolled into Fort Collins at sunset, and Owen Sutton was already planning what he would say. Fort Collins spread out before them as the stagecoach rolled to a stop. It was a decent-sized town, bigger than most in the territory, with wooden buildings lining a main street of packed dirt. The evening sun painted everything in shades of gold and orange. People walked the boardwalks, finishing their daily business before heading home to supper. The passengers climbed down one by one, stretching and groaning after hours of rough travel. The married couple hurried off to find their relatives without looking back. They wanted nothing more to do with the strange woman who had scandalized them all. Vera Buckley collected her single trunk from the storage compartment. It held everything she owned in the world: 3 dresses, a sewing kit, a Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a small wooden box she never opened. Inside that box was a tiny white gown she had sewn for a daughter who would never wear it. She stepped onto the boardwalk and took a breath of fresh air. Her body still hummed with the strange sensation of feeding another woman's child. Her heart still ached in ways she could not name. She meant to walk away. She meant to find her cousin's boarding house and begin the new life she had planned. But before she could take more than 3 steps, a voice stopped her. "Ma'am, please wait." She turned to find Owen Sutton standing behind her with his sleeping son in his arms. He looked older than he had that morning, carved thinner by fear and relief. The arrogance she had first noticed, that wealthy man's certainty that the world would bend to his will, had cracked open to reveal something softer underneath. "I never got your name," he said. "Vera Buckley, Mrs. Buckley." He shifted the baby slightly, carefully, like he was still learning how to hold such a precious burden. "I wanted to thank you properly. What you did on that coach. I cannot begin to express what it meant." Vera nodded once, formal and distant. She was acutely aware of people watching them from across the street. A man and a woman, standing close enough to touch. The scandal of the stagecoach, no doubt already spreading through the town, like wildfire. "You are welcome," she said. "I hope your son thrives." She turned to go. "Wait." Owen's voice carried a note of desperation that stopped her in her tracks. "Please, I need to ask you something." Vera did not turn around. She stood very still, her trunk handle gripped tight in both hands, and waited. "My wet nurse," he said carefully. "She could not come today. Her own daughter went into labor. I came to Fort Collins to find my sister, hoping she might know someone who could help. But I do not know how long that will take. My son." Owen's voice broke slightly. "My son cannot wait." Vera closed her eyes. She knew what he was asking. She knew the answer should be no. A proper widow did not accept such positions from strange men. A proper woman protected her reputation above all else. But she could still feel the weight of that baby in her arms. She could still hear the satisfied sounds he made as he fed, the tiny sighs of contentment that had broken her heart and healed it at the same time. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked without turning around. "Come stay at my sister's house tonight." "Just tonight. Feed my son when he wakes. Tomorrow I will pay you fairly for your trouble and help you find wherever it is you are going. But please." Owen stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the trail dust on his clothes. "Do not let him suffer tonight when you have the power to help." Vera turned slowly. She looked at this desperate man, this wealthy rancher who owned thousands of acres and employed more men than she could count, and she saw the same helplessness she felt in her own heart. "One night," she said, "and then I find my cousin and begin my work at the boarding house." "One night," Owen agreed. "Thank you." His sister's name was Margaret Campbell, and she lived in a nice house on the respectable end of town. She was a widow herself, older than Owen by 5 years, with gray streaks in her brown hair and the same stubborn set to her jaw. She took one look at Vera and understood the situation immediately. "Come in," Margaret said, asking no questions about propriety or reputation. "Come in and rest. The baby will need you before long." The house was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of fresh bread and the soft glow of oil lamps. Margaret showed Vera to a small guest room with a clean bed and a wash basin. She provided fresh water and a bar of good soap without comment. Vera washed the road dust from her face and changed into a clean dress from her trunk. She unpacked her few belongings and placed the wooden box carefully on the nightstand where she could see it. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and waited for the baby to wake. He woke at midnight, crying with that same desperate hunger she had heard on the stagecoach. Owen brought him to her door with dark circles under his eyes and gratitude written across his tired face. Vera took the child without a word and settled into the rocking chair by the window. The feeding was easier this time, less frantic, the baby already remembering what to do. She hummed softly as he nursed, an old lullaby her mother had sung to her years ago. The moon cast silver light through the window. The world outside was quiet and still. When the baby finished, she held him for a long moment, studying his small face. He had his father's strong jaw, even at 2 months old. His eyes, when they opened briefly, were dark blue, the color of deep water. "You need a name," she whispered to him. "A boy cannot go through life being called just baby." Owen had explained on the walk to Margaret's house. He had not been able to settle on a name without his wife there to argue with him. Carolyn had been particular about names, he said. She had lists and opinions and would not be rushed. Now she was gone, and every name Owen considered felt like a decision he had no right to make alone. Vera rocked the baby gently until he fell back asleep. Then she carried him to Owen's door and handed him over, careful not to let their fingers touch. "He ate well," she said quietly. "He should sleep for several hours now." Owen looked at her in the dim hallway light. His face was unreadable. "Thank you," he said. "Again, I cannot seem to stop thanking you." Vera returned to her room and lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and wondering what she had gotten herself into. The next morning, Margaret served breakfast in the sunny kitchen, while Owen explained his situation more fully. His ranch sat along the Poudre River, 2 hours from town by wagon. He ran cattle mostly, over 2,000 head, with 20 men working for him at any given time. His wife Caroline had handled the house and the books and the 1,000 small details that kept a ranch running smoothly. Now she was gone, and everything threatened to fall apart. "I cannot take him back there without someone to feed him," Owen said bluntly. He was not a man who softened hard truths. Mrs. Patterson will be occupied for at least a week, perhaps longer. If her daughter has complications, it could be a month before she returns. Margaret frowned thoughtfully. I can ask around town. There must be someone. There is someone sitting at this table, Owen said. He looked directly at Vera, someone who has already proven she can help. Vera set down her coffee cup. Mr. Sutton, I told you one night I am offering you a job, Owen said. Room and board, fair pay, separate quarters. You would live in your own cabin on the property, completely respectable. All you would need to do is feed my son and help care for him until Mrs. Patterson returns or I find someone permanent. I have a position waiting for me, Vera said. My cousin expects me at the boarding house. Margaret leaned forward. Vera, may I speak plainly? Vera nodded, wary. I know something of boarding housework, Margaret said gently. The hours are long, the pay is poor. You will scrub floors and change linens and deal with traveling men who think a woman alone is an invitation. My brother is offering you something better. Vera looked down at her hands. She thought of the boarding house, the endless labor, the lonely room she would rent with her meager wages. She thought of the baby asleep in the next room, his tiny hand curled around her finger when she fed him this morning. 1 month, she heard herself say. I will stay for 1 month. After that, you must find someone else. Owen nodded slowly. His eyes held something that looked like relief but ran deeper. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition of how much this woman was sacrificing by saying yes. 1 month, he agreed. Thank you, Mrs. Buckley. Margaret smiled and poured more coffee. I will write to your cousin and explain. These things happen in the West. Women help each other when they can. Vera wrapped her hands around the warm cup and told herself this was temporary. She told herself she was simply being practical, taking the better-paying job until she could sort out her future. She told herself many things as she sat in that sunny kitchen, but deep down she knew the truth. She was not staying for the money or the respectable quarters or the easier work. She was staying because that baby had wrapped himself around her broken heart, and she was not yet ready to let go. They left for the ranch the next morning in Owen's wagon. The road was rough but beautiful, winding through grassland that seemed to stretch forever. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with summer snow. Owen drove in silence for the first hour. He was not a man who filled space with idle chatter. Vera appreciated this more than she could say. She had grown tired of people who talked too much and said nothing at all. The baby slept in a padded basket between them, rocked by the motion of the wagon. Vera watched him breathe and felt the strange peace of being needed again. Tell me about your daughter, Owen said suddenly. Vera's breath caught. No one had asked about Martha since she died. People avoided the subject like it was contagious, as if speaking about dead children might curse their own. Her name was Martha, Vera said quietly. She was born in February during the worst storm I had ever seen. She came early, too early. The doctor said her lungs were not ready. Owen listened without interrupting. His hand stayed steady on the reins. She lived for 3 days, Vera continued. I held her the whole time. I barely slept. I thought if I just kept holding her, if I kept her warm enough and loved her hard enough, she might stay. But she did not stay. No. Vera wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She did not stay. They rode in silence for a while, then Owen spoke again. My wife's name was Caroline. We were married for 6 years. She wanted children desperately, but they did not come easily. When she finally got pregnant, she was so happy. He paused, jaw tightening. She made it through the birth. The baby was healthy. I thought the hard part was over. But she bled. She bled, Owen confirmed. The midwife could not stop it. I held her hand while she died, and she made me promise to take care of our son. She made me promise he would have a good life. Vera looked at this man, this wealthy rancher with his thousands of acres and his fine wool coat, and saw someone just as broken as herself, someone stumbling through the wreckage of loss, trying to find a reason to keep moving forward. Ord, we make a sorry pair, she said softly. Owen glanced at her. Something shifted in his expression. Perhaps, but perhaps that is exactly what we need, someone who understands. The wagon rolled on toward the ranch, carrying 2 people who had been shattered by grief and were slowly, carefully, beginning to imagine what it might feel like to be whole again. The Sutton Ranch spread across the land like a kingdom. Vera saw it first from the top of a ridge where Owen stopped the wagon to rest the horses. Below them, the Pudra River curled through green meadows, glittering in the afternoon sun. Cattle dotted the hillsides like scattered seeds. Buildings clustered near the water, dominated by a large main house with a wide porch and windows that caught the light. "This is your home?" Vera asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "This is the ranch," Owen said. "It became my home when I built it with my own hands, 15 years ago. I started with 40 acres and a single milk cow. Everything else came later." He pointed out the various buildings as they descended toward the valley. The main house where he lived, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands slept, the barns and stables and storage buildings, the cookhouse where a man named Cookie prepared meals for 20 men 3 times a day. And there, Owen pointed to a small cabin set apart from the others, nestled against a stand of cottonwood trees. "That is where you will stay." It was built for the foreman, but he prefers the bunkhouse. More company. The cabin was simple but solid, with a stone chimney and a small porch. Vera felt a rush of relief at its distance from the main house. She would have her own space, her own privacy. Whatever arrangement she and Owen had entered into, it would be conducted with proper distance. They pulled up to the main house and a flurry of activity erupted. Men came running to take the horses and unload the wagon. A round woman with gray hair and a flour-dusted apron emerged from the kitchen door, wiping her hands on a towel. "Boss." She nodded at Owen, then looked at Vera with open curiosity. "This the help you went to find?" "This is Mrs. Buckley," Owen said firmly. "She will be staying in the foreman's cabin and helping with my son until Mrs. Patterson returns. I expect her to be treated with the same respect you would show me." The woman's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. "I am Edna. I run the kitchen for the house. You need anything, you come find me." "Thank you," Vera said. Owen led her to the cabin himself, carrying her trunk while she followed with the baby basket. The path wound through tall grass and wildflowers, peaceful and quiet compared to the bustle of the main compound. Inside, the cabin was better than she had expected. A real bed with a proper mattress. A wood stove that looked recently cleaned. A small table with 2 chairs, clean linens folded on a shelf. "I will have Edna bring some things over," Owen said, setting down her trunk. "Food, candles, anything you need. The well is just behind the cabin. I will show you where to find firewood." "This is more than adequate," Vera said. "Thank you." Owen stood awkwardly in the middle of the small room, clearly uncertain how to proceed. He was used to giving orders, not making arrangements with women he barely knew. "The baby," he said finally. "When do you expect he will need to eat again?" Vera looked at the sleeping infant in his basket, likely within the hour. "Bring him to me when he wakes, or I can come to the house, whichever you prefer. I will bring him." Owen moved toward the door, then stopped. "Mrs. Buckley." "Vera." He seemed to struggle with the words. "I want you to know that I understand what you are sacrificing by being here. Your reputation, your plans, your privacy. I do not take it lightly." "I believe you," Vera said. He nodded once and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Vera stood alone in her new home and let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Then she unpacked her trunk, set the wooden box with Martha's gown on the nightstand, and began the strange process of making a temporary life feel permanent. The first week passed in a blur of feedings and sleepless nights. The baby, whom everyone simply called the little one, woke every few hours with hunger that bordered on desperate. Vera's body responded to his need with an intensity that surprised her. The pain she had carried for 6 months, the ache of unused milk and empty arms, finally had somewhere to go. She fed him in the rocking chair that Owen had delivered to her cabin. She fed him on the porch under the stars when the nights were warm enough. She fed him in the main house kitchen when she could not wait for Owen to bring him to her. Each time she felt Martha's memory settle a little more gently in her heart. Owen hovered constantly those first days, watching every feeding with the intensity of a man who had nearly lost everything. He learned quickly how to warm milk without scalding it, how to hold a baby without clutching too tight, how to read the difference between hungry cries and tired cries and cries that meant nothing except a need to be held. "You have good instincts," Vera told him one morning. "You will be a fine father." Owen looked at his son, sleeping peacefully in the crook of his arm. "I do not know how to be a father. I only know how to try." That is all anyone can do. On the 8th day, they named the baby. It happened in the evening on Vera's porch, while the sun set fire to the mountains. Owen had brought the baby for his feeding and stayed afterward, sitting in the extra chair that had mysteriously appeared a few days earlier. He cannot go through life without a name, Vera said, echoing what she had whispered to the baby that first night in Fort Collins. I know. Owen watched his son sleep, emotions flickering across his weathered face. Carolyn had lists, pages and pages of names she liked, names she hated, names that sounded too common or too strange. She would have spent months deciding. What did you want to call him? Owen was quiet for a long moment. Thomas. It was my father's name. He died when I was young, but I remember him being steady, reliable, the kind of man who did what needed to be done without complaint. Thomas is a good name, Vera said. Carolyn wanted James. Owen's voice softened. For her brother who died in the war. She said our son should carry someone's memory forward. Vera thought of Martha's gown, folded in its box. She thought of how grief needed somewhere to live, some way to be honored even as life moved forward. Thomas James, she said quietly, a name that holds both. Owen looked at her. His eyes were shining in the fading light. Thomas James Sutton, he said, testing the sound of it. Thomas James, the baby stirred at the sound of his new name, as if agreeing. From that moment on, the child was Thomas. Tommy, when Edna cooed at him in the kitchen. Tom, when the ranch hands passed him around during Sunday dinners, marveling at how quickly he was growing. But always Thomas James in the formal moments. The name that carried 2 losses and a promise. Life found a rhythm after that. Vera settled into the ranch like she had always belonged there. She fed Thomas 4 times a day, sometimes more when he was fussy. She helped Edna with household tasks when she had energy to spare. She mended clothes for the ranch hands, who had no wives to care for such things. She read books from Owen's surprisingly well-stocked library and discovered that the hard rancher had a weakness for poetry. Owen worked the ranch from sunrise to sunset, but he always made time for his son. He stopped by Vera's cabin in the early mornings to see Thomas before riding out. He returned in the evenings with reports of the day's work and questions about how the baby had slept. He ate supper in the main house most nights, but he sent plates of food to Vera's cabin with a regularity that suggested careful attention. They did not speak of the future. They did not speak of what would happen when Mrs. Patterson returned or when the month ended. They lived in the present, in the daily rhythm of feeding and working and watching a baby grow. But something was building between them. Something neither would acknowledge. Vera noticed it first in the small things. The way Owen's hand lingered when he passed Thomas to her. The way he found excuses to stay on her porch after the baby had been fed. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not watching, with an expression that made her heart beat faster than it should. She reminded herself of the arrangement. She reminded herself of her dead husband and his dead wife. She reminded herself that she was here for the baby, only for the baby, and that anything else would be a complication neither of them could afford. Owen reminded himself of the same things. He told himself it was gratitude he felt, nothing more. Gratitude for the woman who had saved his son's life and continued to nourish him day after day. Gratitude for her quiet competence, her gentle hands, her way of making the ranch feel less empty. But gratitude did not explain the way his chest tightened when she laughed. Gratitude did not explain the dreams that left him aching at dawn. 3 weeks into her stay, Vera woke in the night to find Thomas crying in the main house. The sound carried across the darkness, thin and desperate. She pulled on a wrapper and crossed the yard without thinking, following the sound to Owen's study. She found him pacing the floor with Thomas in his arms, looking as lost as he had on that stagecoach weeks ago. I cannot settle him, Owen said. His voice was ragged with exhaustion. He will not take the bottle. He will not sleep. I have tried everything. Vera took the baby without a word. She sat in the leather chair by the cold fireplace and opened her wrapper enough to feed him. Owen turned away, giving her privacy, but he did not leave the room. The baby quieted immediately, latching on with the desperate hunger of a child who had been waiting too long. Vera hummed softly, stroking his hair, feeling the familiar peace settle over her. I do not know what I would do without you, Owen said quietly. He was standing by the window, looking out at the darkness. This ranch, this life I built, it means nothing without him. and I cannot keep him alive on my own. You are not on your own, Vera said. You have Edna and the hands and your sister and all the people who care about you and Thomas. You are surrounded by help. It is not the same. Owen turned to face her. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face, the lines of worry around his eyes. None of them can do what you do. None of them can feed him, hold him, calm him the way you can. None of them understand. Understand what? The loss. Owen's voice cracked. The way grief sits in your chest like a stone, heavy and cold, and nothing makes it better. The way you wake up reaching for someone who is not there. The way the whole world feels wrong because the person who made it right is gone. Vera's hand stilled on the baby's back. She looked at this man, this stranger who had become something more in just 3 weeks, and felt her heart break open. I understand, she whispered. I know you do. That is why I cannot let you go. Not yet. Owen crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, close enough to touch but carefully keeping his distance. The month is almost over. You said you would stay for a month, and then you would leave. But I am asking you, please do not leave. The baby finished feeding and fell asleep against Vera's chest. She held him close, feeling his small heart beat against her own. What are you asking me? She said carefully. I am asking you to stay, Owen said. Not for another month, not for a year. I am asking you to stay and help me raise my son. I am asking you to stay and build a life here, with us. I am asking you for whatever you are willing to give, and I will not ask for more than that. Vera looked down at the sleeping child. She thought of the boarding house she had never reached. She thought of the lonely room she had imagined, the endless work, the years stretching out before her like an empty road. She thought of this cabin with its rocking chair and its view of the mountains. She thought of Owen's voice in the evenings, telling her about his day. She thought of Thomas's small hand wrapped around her finger, holding on like she was the center of his world. I will stay, she said. For now, that is all I can promise. Owen bowed his head. For now is enough. He rose and left her alone with his son, and Vera sat in the moonlit study until dawn, wondering what she had just agreed to and whether she would ever be brave enough to want more. Summer faded into autumn, and the ranch transformed around them. The hills turned gold and orange. The cattle grew fat on summer grass, ready for the drives that would take them to market. The air sharpened with the first hints of winter. Cold enough in the mornings that Vera could see her breath when she stepped onto her porch. Thomas grew faster than seemed possible. At 4 months, he smiled at everything. At 5 months, he laughed for the first time when Owen bounced him on his knee. At 6 months, he began reaching for things, grabbing at Vera's hair and Owen's beard and anything else that came within range of his determined little hands. The month had long since passed, then 2 months, then 3. Nobody mentioned Mrs. Patterson anymore. Nobody talked about Vera leaving. She had become part of the ranch without anyone noticing the moment it happened. The hands treated her with gruff respect, tipping their hats when she passed and saving the cursing for moments when she was out of earshot. Edna had become something like a friend, sharing gossip from town and teaching Vera her recipes for apple pie and beef stew. Even the horses knew her now, nickering when she approached with apples from the orchard. Owen had changed too, in ways that made Vera's heart ache with something dangerously close to hope. He smiled more easily now. He laughed sometimes, a sound that startled everyone who heard it because it had been so rare in the months after Caroline's death. He still worked hard, still drove himself relentlessly to build and maintain and improve. But there was a lightness to him that had not been there before. Vera told herself not to read too much into these changes. She told herself that he was simply adjusting to fatherhood, finding his footing in his new life. She told herself that whatever warmth she felt from him was gratitude, nothing more. But the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, the way his hand brushed against hers when they passed Thomas between them, the way he found reasons to come to her cabin every evening, to sit on her porch and talk about everything and nothing until the stars came out. These were not the actions of a grateful employer. These were the actions of a man who wanted something he was afraid to name. Vera was afraid to name it too. She had buried a husband and a daughter in the same year. She had promised herself that she would never again depend on another person for her happiness, never again give her heart to someone who could be taken away. The pain of loss had nearly destroyed her once. She was not sure she could survive it a second time. But Thomas needed her. That was what she told herself when the fear grew too strong. She was staying for Thomas, only for Thomas, and anything else that grew between her and Owen was simply a consequence of proximity. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday in late October, delivered by the mail rider who came through once a week. Vera was in the main house kitchen, helping Edna preserve the last of the summer vegetables, when Owen brought it to her. "This came for you," he said, holding out the cream-colored envelope. "From Boston." Vera's hands went cold. She took the letter and recognized the handwriting immediately. Neat, precise, slanting slightly to the right. She had seen this handwriting every day for 2 years of her life. She had memorized every curl and loop in the long nights when she waited for letters that came too rarely. The letter was from Daniel Shaw. She excused herself and walked to her cabin on legs that trembled. She sat in her rocking chair and held the envelope for a long moment before finding the courage to open it. "My dear Vera," the letter began, "I trust this finds you well. I have made inquiries and learned of your circumstances. I know about your husband's passing and your daughter's death, and I offer my deepest condolences." Vera read on, her heart pounding harder with each line. Daniel Shaw had been her sweetheart before she married Peter Buckley. They had met at a church social when Vera was 16 and Daniel was 19, both of them too young to know what love really meant. He had courted her for 2 years, promising that one day he would make his fortune and come back to marry her properly. Then his father had died, and Daniel had gone to Boston to take over the family business. He had promised to send for her within a year. The year became 2, then 5, then 10. His letters grew less frequent, his promises more vague. Eventually, Vera had given up waiting and married Peter Buckley, a kind man who offered her a solid present instead of an uncertain future. Now Daniel was writing to say that he was finally ready. "I have built the life I promised you," the letter continued. "I own a house on Beacon Hill. I have a successful import business. I am respected in society and comfortable in my finances. All that is missing is you. I know I made you wait too long. I know you had every right to move on with your life. But I have never forgotten you, Vera. I have never stopped loving you. When I learned that you were widowed and alone, I knew it was a sign, a second chance for both of us. I am coming to Fort Collins. I will arrive before the end of November. I want to see you, to speak with you, to finally keep the promise I made 12 years ago. I want to make you my wife." Vera read the letter 3 times, then she set it down and stared at the wall of her cabin, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Daniel Shaw was coming. The man she had waited for all those years, the man she had loved before she knew what love cost, was finally ready to claim her. He was offering everything she had once wanted: a home, a husband, a life in a big city far from the grief that haunted her here. Why did the thought fill her with dread instead of joy? Owen found her an hour later, sitting in the same chair with the letter in her lap. "You have not moved since I gave you that envelope," he said from the doorway. "Is something wrong?" Vera looked up at him, at his weather-worn face and his kind eyes and the worry lines that had appeared between his brows. At the man who had given her a home when she needed one, who had trusted her with his son, who had shown her that it was possible to survive loss and find something worth living for on the other side. "I need to tell you something," she said. Owen came into the cabin and sat in the chair across from her. He did not speak, just waited with the patience of a man used to harsh land and harder seasons. Vera told him everything. She told him about Daniel Shaw and the promises made 12 years ago. She told him about the waiting and the letters and the slow death of hope. She told him about Peter Buckley and the marriage that had been good enough, if not passionate. She told him about the letter in her lap and the man who was coming to claim her life, as if she had left it untouched on a shelf. Owen listened without interrupting. When she finished, his face was carefully blank, showing nothing of what he felt. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I do not know," Vera said honestly. "I thought I would know. I thought if Daniel ever came back, I would run to him without hesitation. But now everything is different." "What is different?" Vera looked down at her hands. She thought of Thomas's laugh. She thought of Edna's friendship and the ranch hand's respect. She thought of evenings on the porch with Owen, watching the stars come out while crickets sang in the grass. "I am different," she said quietly. "I am not the girl who waited by the window anymore. I am a widow who has buried a child. I have survived things that girl could never have imagined, and I am not sure I want the life Daniel is offering." Owen leaned forward in his chair. His eyes were intense, burning with something he was clearly struggling to contain. "You do not owe him anything," Owen said. 12 years of silence erased whatever claim he had on your future. You can tell him no. You can send him away without a second thought, and no one would blame you. It is not that simple. Then explain it to me." Owen's voice was rough. "Tell me what hold this man has on you. Tell me why you are even considering leaving when you have built a life here, when Thomas needs you. When I—" He stopped himself, his jaw clenched. He looked away. "When you what?" Vera asked softly. Owen was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "When I have spent every day of the last 3 months falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Vera felt her heart stop, then start again with a painful lurch. Owen stood abruptly and moved toward the door. "I should not have said that. I apologize. You are dealing with enough without me adding my feelings to the pile." "Wait." He stopped but did not turn around. Vera rose from her chair and crossed the small room until she stood behind him. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man bracing for a blow. "Owen," she said, "turn around." He turned slowly. His face was guarded, prepared for rejection. "I did not know," Vera said. "Or perhaps I did, and I was too afraid to let myself see it. But you need to understand something. The reason I do not know what to do about Daniel, it is not because I still love him. It is because I've been telling myself that whatever I feel for you is just gratitude, just convenience, just two broken people finding comfort in each other's company. But when you said you were falling in love with me," Vera's voice trembled, "I realized I have been lying to myself, because I have been falling too." Owen's breath caught. He raised one hand slowly, carefully, and touched her cheek with fingers that were rough from work and gentle from hope. "Then stay," he said. "Stay and let Daniel Shaw return to Boston alone. Stay and help me raise Thomas. Stay and let me spend the rest of my life proving that this love is worth the risk." Vera leaned into his touch. Her eyes were wet with tears she did not try to hide. "I cannot promise you anything yet," she said. "I need to see him. I need to look him in the eye and say no. I need to close that chapter properly before I can begin a new one." Owen nodded. He understood. He was a man who finished what he started, who honored his obligations, who did not leave loose ends dangling. "Then see him," he said. "Tell him no, and then come home to us." He kissed her forehead, soft and brief, and then he left her alone with a letter and a decision and a heart that had finally stopped being afraid. Daniel Shaw arrived in Fort Collins on the last day of November. Vera had spent the weeks since receiving his letter in a state of quiet preparation. She had continued her work on the ranch, feeding Thomas and helping Edna, and spending her evenings on the porch with Owen. But underneath the routine, she was building her courage. She was not the girl who had waited by the window. She had to prove it to Daniel, but more importantly, she had to prove it to herself. Owen offered to come with her to town. She refused gently but firmly. This was something she had to do alone. "I will take Thomas to Margaret's house for the afternoon," Owen said the morning she left. "If you need more time, if you want to stay in town overnight, just send word." "I will not need overnight," Vera said. "This will not take long." She drove the small buggy into Fort Collins with her back straight and her jaw set. She was wearing her best dress, the blue one she had sewn the year before her daughter died. It fit differently now. Everything fit differently now. Daniel was waiting at the hotel when she arrived. She recognized him immediately, even after 12 years. He was still handsome, still well-dressed, still carrying himself with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. His hair had some gray in it now, and there were lines around his eyes that had not been there before. But his smile was the same. "Vera." He crossed the hotel lobby and took her hands in his. "You are even more beautiful than I remembered." "Daniel." She allowed his grip, but did not return the pressure. "Thank you for the warning of your arrival." He led her to a private parlor that he had clearly arranged in advance. Tea was waiting on a small table. Flowers sat in a vase by the window. He had planned this meeting down to the smallest detail. "I know you must be angry with me," Daniel said once they were seated. 12 years is a long time to wait. I stopped waiting years ago, Vera said. I married another man. I know, and I am sorry for your loss. But Vera, surely you see that this is fate. We were meant to be together. We were meant to find our way back to each other. Vera looked at this man who had once held her entire heart. She searched for any trace of the love she had felt all those years ago. She found only a faint echo, like a song heard from very far away. Why did you wait so long? She asked. Daniel shifted in his seat. The business was more complicated than I expected. My father left debts I did not know about. It took years to untangle them and build something stable. I could not ask you to share a struggling life. I wanted to offer you comfort. You could have written more often. You could have explained. I should have. Daniel reached for her hands again. I was a fool. I was proud and stubborn, and I thought I could make you wait forever. But I am here now, Vera. I am here to make it right. Vera pulled her hands away gently. Daniel, I am grateful that you came. I am glad to see that you have built the life you wanted, but I cannot go with you to Boston. His face fell. Is there someone else? Vera thought of Owen, of his rough hands and kind eyes, of the way he looked at her like she was the center of his world. Yes, she said, there is someone else. The rancher. Daniel's voice tightened. I made inquiries before I came. The wealthy widower with the infant son. They say you are living on his property, working as his nursemaid. I am caring for his child, Vera corrected. A child I have grown to love as my own. Daniel leaned forward. Vera, listen to me. I can offer you everything. A house in the finest neighborhood of Boston, servants, society. You would never want for anything again. What can this rancher give you? A hard life on the frontier? Endless work and isolation? He can give me something you never could, Vera said quietly. A place where I belong. A family that needs me. A man who tells me the truth even when it is hard. I always told you the truth. No, you told me what I wanted to hear, and then you disappeared for years at a time. You made promises you never intended to keep. You let me wait and wonder and slowly lose hope, all because you were too proud to admit you were not ready. Daniel's face reddened. That is unfair. It is perfectly fair. Vera stood from her chair. She felt taller than she had in years, stronger, more certain of her own worth. I loved you once, she said. I loved you with the pure, foolish heart of a girl who did not know how the world could hurt. But that girl is gone. She died in pieces over 12 years of silence, and she died completely when she buried her daughter in a frozen February grave. Vera, I am not that girl anymore, Vera continued. I am a woman who has survived things you cannot imagine. I have buried a husband and a child. I have crossed the country alone with nothing but one trunk and a broken heart. I have found work and purpose in something that feels like hope, all without your help. Daniel stood too. His face was a mixture of frustration and something that might have been genuine pain. I love you, he said. I have always loved you. Then you should have shown it, Vera said simply. Love is not words. It is not promises made from safe distances. Love is showing up. Love is being there. Love is choosing someone every day, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. And this rancher, he shows up every single day. Vera smiled softly and the expression transformed her face. He brought me water when I was thirsty and never mentioned it. He sat on my porch every evening and talked to me about his day. He trusted me with his son when he had every reason to protect that child from strangers. He told me his fears and his grief and never asked me to fix them, just to witness them. That is love, Daniel. What you are offering is just the idea of love. 12 years out of date, Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then his shoulders slumped. I was a fool, he said again. I was a fool to wait so long. Yes, but I hope you find happiness anyway. I hope you go back to Boston and find a woman who has been waiting for someone like you. I hope you give her the life you planned for me. But I cannot be that woman. Not anymore. She moved toward the door. Vera, Daniel's voice stopped her one more time. I am sorry. For everything, for the waiting and the silence, and for coming here expecting to pick up where we left off. I should have known better. Vera turned to look at him. In that moment, she felt the last chain of her old life fall away. I forgive you, she said. Goodbye, Daniel. She walked out of the hotel and climbed into the buggy without looking back. The streets of Fort Collins bustled around her, full of people going about their ordinary lives, unaware that she had just closed a chapter that had been open for 12 years. She drove back to the ranch as the sun began to set. The road was familiar now, every curve and hill as known to her as her own heartbeat. When she crested the final ridge and saw the valley spread out below, she felt something settle in her chest. Home. The word came to her unbidden, but it fit. This place with its wide sky and green meadows and the house where Owen and Thomas were waiting. This was home. She found them on the porch of the main house, Owen holding Thomas on his knee while the baby grabbed at everything within reach. Owen looked up when she approached, and she saw the question in his eyes. "He is gone," she said simply. "Back to Boston where he belongs." Owen stood slowly. Thomas squirmed in his arms, reaching for Vera with grabby hands. "And you?" Owen asked. Vera took Thomas and settled him against her hip. The baby immediately began playing with her hair, babbling happily. "I am home," she said. "If you will have me." Owen crossed the porch in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, baby and all. Thomas squawked in protest at being squished, but neither adult cared. "I will have you," Owen said into her hair, "for as long as you will stay." "Forever," Vera whispered back. "Is forever long enough?" Owen kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Thomas grabbed both their noses simultaneously and laughed at his own joke. They stood together as the sun set behind the mountains, 3 people who had found each other against all odds. The past was behind them. The future stretched out ahead. Yet uncertain but no longer frightening. Vera had made her choice, and for the first time in years, she knew without doubt that it was the right one. Winter settled over the Sutton Ranch like a quiet blanket. The first snow fell in early December, turning the hills white and the world silent. The cattle had been brought closer to the barns. The ranch hands spent their days mending fences and equipment, preparing for the long months ahead. Smoke rose from every chimney, curling into skies that were gray more often than blue. Vera moved into the main house. It was Owen's suggestion, made practical by the cold. Her cabin stove worked fine, but carrying Tomid back and forth through snowdrifts seemed foolish when there were perfectly good bedrooms standing empty. Vera agreed, telling herself it was simply sensible. But the truth was deeper than that. The truth was that she wanted to be closer to Owen. She wanted to wake up knowing he was just down the hall. She wanted to share meals at the same table and evenings by the same fire. She wanted all the small intimacies that came from sharing a home. Owen gave her Caroline's old sewing room. It had been emptied of his late wife's things months before, and now it held only a bed, a wardrobe, and a rocking chair by the window. Vera added her few possessions and made it hers. Thomas's nursery was directly next door. She could hear him when he woke in the night, could reach him in seconds when he cried. Owen's bedroom was at the far end of the hall, a distance that felt both too far and not far enough. They were careful with each other in those first weeks. The confession on her porch had changed everything, but neither was quite sure what came next. Owen had been a widower for less than a year. Vera had been consumed by grief for longer than that. The feelings between them were real, but rushing would only damage something precious. So they courted, properly, carefully, like young people who had all the time in the world. Owen brought her coffee every morning, prepared exactly the way she liked it. Vera mended his shirts and socks without being asked. They sat together in the parlor after Thomas went to bed, reading or talking or simply enjoying the silence of shared company. Sometimes their hands touched. Sometimes their eyes met and held for a moment too long. But Owen never pushed for more, and Vera did not offer it. They were building something that would last. That required patience. Christmas approached, and the ranch transformed. Edna supervised the decoration of the main house, directing ranch hands who looked deeply uncomfortable holding garlands and ribbon. A tree was cut from the mountains and set up in the parlor, its branches covered with candles and the paper ornaments that Carolyn had made over years of holidays. Owen grew quiet when he saw those ornaments. Vera found him one evening standing alone in the parlor, holding a paper angel with a trembling hand. "She made this the first Christmas we were married," he said without turning around. She was so proud of it. "Look how crooked the wings are." Vera came to stand beside him. The angel was indeed crooked, its wings different sizes, its halo more oval than round. But someone had loved making it. That love showed in every imperfect fold. "We do not have to use them," she said gently, "if it hurts too much." Owen shook his head. Thomas should grow up with his mother's ornaments on his tree. He should know she existed, that she loved him even though she never got to hold him. "Then we will use them." Vera touched his arm lightly. "And you can tell him about her, about how she made each one, about how much she wanted him." Owen turned to look at her. His eyes were wet. "You would do that? Help me keep her memory alive for him?" She was his mother. Vera's voice was steady. "Nothing can change that. Nothing should erase it. I am not trying to replace her, Owen. I am just trying to add to what Thomas has. More love. More people who care about him. More hands to hold him when he cries." Owen pulled her into his arms then, there in the parlor with the Christmas tree glowing behind them. "How did I find you?" he asked against her hair. "You did not," Vera said. "Thomas did. He screamed loud enough to shake my heart loose, and here I am." Owen laughed, a watery sound but genuine. "Then I owe my son more than I can ever repay." Christmas morning was bright and cold. Thomas woke at dawn as usual, but this time there were presents waiting in the parlor. Small things: a carved wooden horse from Owen, a knitted blanket from Vera, a ridiculous stuffed bear from Margaret, who had sent a whole box of gifts from Fort Collins. Thomas ignored the presents entirely in favor of eating the wrapping paper. Owen and Vera sat on the floor beside him, drinking coffee and laughing at his determination to fit an entire sheet of tissue into his mouth. The fire crackled in the hearth. Snow fell softly outside the windows. For one perfect morning, the world contained nothing but warmth and joy. "I have something for you," Owen said, when the paper had been rescued from the baby. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Vera's heart stuttered. "Open it," Owen said. "It is not what you think." She opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a cameo brooch, carved from shell, showing a woman's profile surrounded by flowers. "It belonged to my mother," Owen explained. "She wore it on her wedding day. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to someone worthy." "Owen, I am not asking you to marry me," Owen said quickly. "Not yet. I know we need more time. But I wanted you to have this. I wanted you to know that I am serious. That I am not just taking comfort in your presence or confusing gratitude with love. I want to spend my life with you, Vera. When you are ready, I want to make you my wife." Vera looked at the brooch. The carving was delicate and beautiful, clearly an heirloom of great value. She thought of the woman who had worn it on her wedding day, full of hope and love. She thought of Owen keeping it all these years, waiting for the right moment. "I will treasure it," she said, "and when I am ready, I will wear it proudly." Owen kissed her then, soft and sweet, with Thomas babbling between them. It was not a passionate kiss. It was something better, a promise of what was to come. The winter months passed slowly. Vera grew to love the rhythm of the snowbound ranch, the quiet mornings when the world was white and still, the long evenings by the fire with Owen reading aloud while she mended clothes. The bright afternoons when Thomas discovered snow for the first time and screamed with either delight or outrage. No one was quite sure. She and Owen talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, the mistakes they had made, and the lessons they had learned. They discussed the ranch and its future, the plans Owen had for expansion, the challenges of running such a large operation. Vera shared her ideas freely, and Owen listened. He was surprised to discover that she had a head for numbers, for strategy, for the kind of careful planning that made the difference between profit and loss. By February, she was keeping the ranch books, and they were more organized than they had ever been. They talked about Caroline too, about how she had been fierce and stubborn and full of opinions, about how she had argued with Owen daily and made up with him nightly, about how she had wanted children so badly that she had cried every month when they did not come. "She would have been a wonderful mother," Owen said one evening. "She would have spoiled Thomas rotten and disciplined him strictly and loved him with everything she had." "I wish I could have known her," Vera said honestly. "You would have liked her." Owen smiled sadly. "And she would have liked you. She admired women who were not afraid to speak their minds. Then we would have gotten along very well." They talked about Martha too, about her tiny fingers and her quiet breasts and the 3 days of perfect joy before she was taken. Vera cried when she spoke of her daughter, and Owen held her without trying to fix anything. He understood that some grief could not be fixed, only witnessed. By March, the snow was beginning to melt. The days grew longer. The ranch hands returned to outdoor work. Calves were born in the barns, wobbly-legged and crying for their mothers. Life pushed forward, as it always did, regardless of loss or fear or heartbreak. One evening, Vera sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold. Owen came to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Thomas is asleep," he reported. "Finally. I think he is getting teeth. He tried to bite my finger clean off." Vera laughed. "He is a fierce one. He gets it from his father. I thought stubbornness came from his mother." "That too." Owen turned to look at her. His face was serious in the fading light. "Vera, I have been patient. I have given you time to grieve and time to settle and time to figure out what you want. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." Vera's heart began to pound. "Ask me, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air, simple and enormous. Vera looked at this man who had become everything to her. This man who had shown her that it was possible to survive loss and find joy on the other side. This man who loved her enough to wait, who trusted her enough to share his son, who needed her not as a replacement, but as a partner. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Owen's face transformed. The careful control he always maintained cracked open to reveal pure, overwhelming joy. "You are sure?" he asked. "You are not just saying yes because of Thomas, or because it is practical, or because you feel obligated?" "I am saying yes because I love you," Vera said. "I am saying yes because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I am saying yes because when I think about the future, you are standing beside me in every version I can picture." Owen pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly this time. Not gentle, not careful, full of passion and promise and years of waiting finally coming to an end. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Vera laughed. "I suppose we should tell Edna," she said. "She will want to plan a feast. We should tell everyone." Owen grinned like a boy half his age. "I want the whole territory to know that Vera Buckley has agreed to become my wife." "Vera Sutton," she corrected. "Vera Sutton sounds right. It sounds perfect." They sat together as the last light faded from the sky, making plans and sharing dreams and marveling at the strange paths that had brought them to this moment. A stagecoach and a crying baby, a desperate offer and an unthinkable act of kindness. Two broken people who had somehow made each other whole. The wedding would be in May, they decided. When the wildflowers bloomed and the world felt new, it could not come soon enough. They married on the first Sunday of May in the small church in Fort Collins. The day was clear and bright, warm enough for spring flowers but cool enough for comfort. The church was packed with ranchers and their families, merchants from town, and half the population of Fort Collins who had heard about the wedding and found reasons to attend. Owen wore his best suit, the dark wool one that Caroline had helped him choose years ago. He had thought about buying something new, about starting fresh without any ghosts hanging on his shoulders. But in the end, he decided that ghosts were part of who he was. He would carry them forward, not leave them behind. Vera wore blue, not white because she was a widow and white would have been improper, but a beautiful soft blue that matched her eyes and made her skin glow. Margaret had helped her sew it over the course of a month, both women laughing and crying as they worked on something so full of hope. The cameo brooch from Owen's mother was pinned at her throat. Something old and something borrowed and something that felt exactly right. Thomas sat in the front pew with Edna, dressed in a miniature suit that made him look like a tiny banker. He babbled throughout the ceremony and attempted to eat the hymnal twice. Nobody minded. The minister spoke of love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Owen listened with half an ear, his attention fixed on the woman standing beside him. Vera, his Vera, the woman who had walked into his life on a dusty stagecoach and saved everything he cared about. When the time came for vows, Owen spoke clearly and without hesitation. "I promise to love you in plenty and in want," he said, "in travail and in sorrow, in sickness and in health. I promise to be your partner in all things, to trust your judgment and value your opinion. I promise to share my life with you completely, hiding nothing, offering everything. I promise this for as long as we both shall live. Vera's eyes were wet as she made her own vows. I promise to stand beside you through every storm and every blessing, she said. I promise to love your son as my own and to honor the memory of those we have lost. I promise to be honest with you even when honesty is hard and to choose you every day even when choosing is difficult. I promise this not because it is expected, but because I cannot imagine promising anything else. The minister pronounced them husband and wife. Owen kissed Vera while the congregation applauded, and Thomas shrieked with what might have been approval or protest. It was impossible to tell. They walked out of the church into bright sunshine, hand in hand, married. The celebration at the ranch lasted 3 days. Owen had arranged for a barbecue the likes of which the territory had never seen. 2 steers and a dozen chickens, enough pie to feed an army, barrels of beer and cider and lemonade for the children. Dancing in the barn that went past midnight on the first night and past dawn on the second. Ranchers came from 50 miles away to offer congratulations. The Sutton name carried weight in the territory, and everyone wanted to meet the woman who had captured the famously stubborn widower's heart. Vera smiled and shook hands until her face ached and her fingers went numb. But she did not mind. These were her people now. This was her community. She belonged here in a way she had never belonged anywhere before. On the third night, when the last guest had finally gone home and the ranch hands had stumbled to their bunks, Owen carried Vera over the threshold of the main house. "Officially my wife," he said as he set her down in the parlor. "Officially home." "I have been home for months," Vera said. "This just makes it legal." They checked on Thomas together, watching him sleep in his crib with one fist pressed against his cheek. He was 9 months old now, sturdy and growing, with his father's dark hair and his mother's stubborn chin. He had started crawling last week and had already discovered how to get into everything he was not supposed to touch. "He will need siblings," Owen said quietly. "Someone to play with, someone to torment." Vera leaned against him. "Eventually, let me enjoy having just one for a while longer." Owen wrapped his arms around her. "Whatever you want. We have time." They did have time. That was the miracle of it. After all the loss and grief and years of waiting, they finally had time. The first year of marriage passed like a dream. Vera settled into her role as mistress of the ranch with surprising ease. She managed the household, kept the books, and mediated disputes between ranch hands with a calm authority that earned everyone's respect. When calving season overwhelmed the men, she rolled up her sleeves and helped in the barns. When a drought threatened the summer grazing, she was the one who found an alternative water source by studying old survey maps. Owen watched her with amazement and growing love. He had married a partner, not a dependent, an equal, not a subordinate. Every day, he discovered something new to admire about his wife. Thomas took his first steps 3 days after his first birthday. He walked straight into Vera's arms, bypassing Owen entirely, and said "Mama" with perfect clarity. Owen pretended to be offended. "I am just furniture around here." "You are very comfortable furniture," Vera said, kissing his cheek. "He will say Papa soon enough." Papa came a week later, followed by No and Mine and the endless stream of words that marked Thomas's discovery of language. He was a bright child, curious about everything, constantly asking questions that neither parent could answer. "Why is the sky blue? Why do cows eat grass? Why does Papa smell like horses?" "Because your father refuses to bathe properly," Vera said to the last question. "I bathed yesterday," Owen protested. "That was 3 days ago. Surely not. I keep track. I am very organized." Their marriage was full of such moments, teasing and laughter in the easy comfort of two people who knew each other completely. They disagreed sometimes, argued occasionally, but always came back to the same foundation of respect and love. The second winter brought news that changed everything. Vera was pregnant. She had suspected for weeks before the doctor confirmed it. The familiar signs, the morning sickness, the tenderness, the way her body seemed to know before her mind caught up. Owen received the news with tears in his eyes. "A baby," he kept saying. "Our baby, yours and mine." "I am aware of how babies are made," Vera said dryly. "I was involved in the process. But this is different." Owen pulled her close. "This is not me raising a child alone. or you nursing someone else's baby. This is ours, created together. Proof that we are a family. We were already a family. Now we will be a bigger one. The pregnancy was easy compared to her first. Vera was older now, healthier, surrounded by people who cared for her. Owen fussed constantly, insisting she rest more, eat more, do less. She tolerated it for the first few months, then put her foot down. I am pregnant, not dying, she told him firmly. I will continue to run this household as I see fit, and you will stop hovering like a worried hen. Owen retreated, chastened but not convinced. He simply learned to hover more subtly. Thomas was fascinated by his mother's growing belly. He talked to it constantly, explaining important things like the names of all the ranch cats and why bedtime was an unfair institution. He was convinced the baby could hear him and was taking detailed notes. The baby's going to be on my side, he informed his parents. We are going to gang up on you. Is that so? Owen said. What if the baby is on our side instead? Thomas considered this. Then I will need more allies, maybe a dog. You have a dog, a bigger dog. The baby was born in early spring, on a night when rain pattered against the windows and the fire crackled warm in the hearth. The labor was long but uncomplicated. Vera held Owen's hand and pushed when the midwife told her to and tried not to scream too loudly because Thomas was sleeping down the hall. A girl. She came into the world crying, red-faced and furious, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could shake the rafters. The midwife laid her on Vera's chest, and Vera felt the world narrow down to this one perfect moment. Hello, little one, she whispered. We have been waiting for you. Owen leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face. She is beautiful. She looks like an angry potato. A beautiful angry potato. They named her Caroline Martha. Caroline for the woman who should have been there. Martha for the daughter who lived only 3 days. The name carried both losses and transformed them into something new, something alive. Thomas met his sister the next morning. He studied her with the serious expression of a 2-year-old considering a major decision. She is very small, he said finally. She will grow, Vera promised. Can she play with me? Not yet, but soon. Thomas nodded. He reached out one finger and touched his sister's tiny hand. She grabbed it immediately and held on. She likes me, Thomas said, delighted. She knows I am her brother. Yes, Vera smiled through happy tears. She knows. Owen gathered his family close, his wife, exhausted but glowing, his son, proud and protective, his daughter, new and perfect and full of possibility. This is everything, he said quietly. Everything I ever wanted and more than I deserve. You deserve all of it, Vera said. We both do. We survived enough to earn this happiness. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. The first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the world in shades of pink and gold. A new day, a new life, a new chapter in the story they were writing together. The Sutton family had grown, and nothing would ever be the same. The years passed like seasons, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas grew tall and strong, with his father's stubborn jaw and his birth mother's fierce spirit. He learned to ride before he learned to read, and by the time he was 10, he could work cattle as well as any hand on the ranch. He called Vera Mama without hesitation and knew the truth about Caroline only as a beloved story, a woman who had wanted him desperately and died giving him life. Caroline Martha, called Carrie by everyone who knew her, was her mother's daughter through and through. She was quiet and watchful, with clever hands and a mind that never stopped working. She could mend anything, solve any puzzle, and argue any point until her opponents surrendered in exhaustion. 2 more children followed. James, named for Owen's father and arriving 3 years after Carrie, was a gentle soul who preferred books to horses and spent his afternoons helping Edna in the kitchen. Ruth, the baby of the family, came 5 years after James and seemed determined from birth to cause as much chaos as possible. The ranch prospered under Owen and Vera's partnership. They expanded twice, buying neighboring land when it became available, building new barns and hiring more hands. The Sutton name became synonymous with quality cattle and fair dealing throughout the territory. But it was not success that defined their years. It was the small moments. Thomas teaching Carrie to ride her first pony, James reading poetry aloud while Ruth threw food at him from her high chair. Owen falling asleep in his chair after long days, only to wake when Vera kissed his forehead. Family dinners that grew louder each year as more voices joined the conversation. Vera learned that joy could coexist with grief. She never forgot Martha, her first daughter who had lived only 3 days. She never forgot Peter, her first husband who had been kind if not passionate. She carried these losses with her always, not as weights but as parts of her story. Owen never forgot Caroline either. He told his children about her often, making sure they knew the woman who had loved their father and wanted them so badly. Vera encouraged this without jealousy, understanding that love was not a finite resource to be rationed. They had enough love for the living and the dead. The 20th anniversary of their meeting on the Stagecoach arrived on an August day, much like the original. Hot and dusty, with a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. Owen and Vera sat on the porch of the main house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas had married a rancher's daughter from Denver and had 3 children of his own. Carrie had married a lawyer and moved to Fort Collins, but she visited often with her twin girls. James was still at home, helping run the ranch, courting a school teacher from town. Ruth had just turned 15 and was convinced she knew everything about everything. Hard to believe it has been 20 years, Owen said. He was gray now with lines carved deep around his eyes and a stoop to his shoulders that had not been there before. But his hand in Vera's was warm and strong. Some days it feels like yesterday, Vera said. Other days it feels like a lifetime. A good lifetime. The best lifetime. Vera leaned against him. I never could have imagined any of this. That day on the Stagecoach, I was just trying to survive. I had no idea I was about to find everything I never knew I needed. Owen kissed her hair. I was drowning. I did not know it, but I was going under. And then there you were, saving my son, saving me. We saved each other. They watched the children play as the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. Somewhere in the house, Edna was preparing dinner, her movements slower now, but her skills undiminished. The ranch hands were finishing their day's work, their voices carrying across the evening air. This was the life they had built. Not perfect, because nothing was perfect. There had been hard years, droughts and storms and sicknesses that frightened them all, arguments that lasted days and silences that stretched for weeks. But they had come through everything together. They had chosen each other every morning and every night, through joy and sorrow, through plenty and want. They had built a family from broken pieces and discovered that broken things could become stronger than those that had never been damaged at all. I love you, Vera said quietly. I have loved you for 20 years, and I will love you for 20 more. Only 20? Owen pretended offense. I was hoping for at least 30. Fine, 30, but you have to keep bathing regularly. I bathed yesterday. That was 3 days ago. Surely not. Vera laughed the same laugh she had laughed 1,000 times in their years together. Owen laughed too, and the sound carried across the yard where their grandchildren were playing, where their children were living, where everything good had grown from one impossible choice on a dusty stagecoach 20 years before. On a summer evening, many years later, Vera sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. She was alone for the moment, but not lonely. The house behind her hummed with activity. Great-grandchildren running through hallways. Adults preparing food and setting tables. The sounds of a family gathering for Sunday dinner, as they did every week without fail. Owen joined her with 2 cups of coffee, moving slowly but steadily. He was 80 years old now, white-haired and weathered. But his eyes were still sharp and his love was still fierce. Thought you might want this, he said, handing her a cup. You always know what I want. After 50 years, I should hope so. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sky change colors, pink and gold and orange, painting the mountains in shades they had seen 1,000 times and never tired of. Thomas is bringing his grandchildren tomorrow, Vera said. He wants them to see the ranch. All of them? Owen asked. That is a small army. 8, I think. Maybe 9. I lose count. Our legacy, Owen said. All those children carrying our blood forward into the future. Vera smiled. She thought of Martha, her first daughter, who had lived only 3 days. She thought of all the children she had raised and loved and watched grow into adults with children of their own. The loss had never disappeared completely, but it had been transformed, softened by time, surrounded by so much life that it no longer stood alone. I think about the stagecoach sometimes, she said. That day when everything changed. I think about it too. Owen reached for her hand. I think about how close I came to losing everything. How close Thomas came to dying because I could not feed him. How close I came to drowning in grief before you pulled me out. We pulled each other out. Yes, we did. The door opened behind them, and Ruth emerged with a plate of cookies. She was 60 now, still causing chaos wherever she went, currently arguing with her own daughter about something that sounded utterly trivial. Mama, Daddy, Ruth said, dinner is almost ready, but I brought you something to tide you over. She kissed them both and disappeared back inside, her voice rising again as she continued her argument. Owen bit into a cookie inside with satisfaction. She still cannot bake worth a damn. These are terrible, Vera agreed, eating her own cookie. I love her anyway. Of course we do. She is ours. The sun sank lower and the first stars began to appear. From inside the house came the sounds of family, laughter and argument, and children crying, and adults consoling. The sounds of life continuing, generation after generation, each one built on the foundation laid by those who came before. Owen turned to Vera. His eyes were bright with tears he did not try to hide. Thank you, he said simply, for the Stagecoach day, for staying, for choosing us. Vera squeezed his hand. She thought of all the moments that had brought them here. The impossible choice on a dusty road, the first time Owen said he loved her, the births and deaths and ordinary days that had woven themselves into a life. We saved each other, she said. That is what matters. They sat together as the sky darkened, holding hands as they had held hands for 50 years. Two people who had been shattered by grief and rebuilt by love. Two people who had learned that the hardest choices sometimes led to the greatest blessings. The Stagecoach promise had been kept. A crying baby had brought two broken hearts together, and from that impossible beginning, a family had grown. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and lasting and full of more love than either of them had ever imagined possible. That was enough. That was everything.